of outstanding fines that were issued under this unconstitutional rubric. With that said, I'd be happy to take any questions that anyone have.
Alexis, ABC6. So how can health departments enforce this? I mean, is the law even still, I mean, does it even still matter now, considering that health departments can no longer find the actual establishment? They have to go in and get the individual? Is that what now this ruling basically says?
That is precisely what the law says. What the actual smoking ban statute says is just that. You know, the health departments have pointed out over and over again that the smoking ban is popular. It was passed by 58% of the people. But what those 58% of the people likely didn't anticipate was that a government agency would just waltz into an establishment and levy a crushing $5,000 fine without investigation. They likely never also foresaw that this would turn ugly to the point where agencies threaten to actually seize and close down businesses due to the smoking ban violations. What this means is that the agency has to actually investigate prior to issuing a fine, or else that fine is invalid. They need to actually talk to the person who's smoking the cigarette to determine who's responsible. And it is important to note that it's not necessarily clear that that person has any obligation to respond to a health department employee. This is not a police officer. So if you are in fact an individual who is smoking in a bar, it's not clear at all that there's a legal obligation for you to provide identifying information or comply with the health department's request for information.
This ruling was for Franklin County, and the state says it's going to appeal. What effect will this have outside Franklin County? And if the state does appeal, will it have any immediate effect in Franklin County?
Well, it is a state court decision. The effect is not actually different inside of Franklin County than it is outside of Franklin County. The decision on its face invalidates ODH's and local health departments' enforcement of the law, the method of enforcement across the state. Because the court invalidates the methods used, and those methods are widespread throughout the state, effectively the court's decision invalidates the way that all health departments throughout the state have been enforcing the law, and therefore it has an impact upon how on business owners who have been cited under the law up until now throughout the state and over the last 3 years.
What about the appeal?
Let me add real quickly to that point that the OLBA is beginning an education program to make sure that all of our permit holders in the state of Ohio, and we're doing this in conjunction with Attorney Thompson, that all permit holders in the state of Ohio will thoroughly understand what their responsibility is under the law, and we think that that will add clarity for them and their customers.
And you asked about the appeal. I will answer that question. There certainly will be an appeal. We expect an appeal because it's a sweeping decision that has a great impact for the state as well. And there's a fair amount of money on the line and collected fines as far as they're concerned. However, we feel like the decision, although perhaps it could have been articulated in a more clear way, is on extremely strong constitutional grounds. That if you'd like to read our brief, we can make that available to you. It feels that the law is extremely clear that administrative agencies cannot make the law, and that is precisely what the facts indicate was done here. Our testimony at trial, our evidence at trial in Zeno's case very clearly demonstrated that. And if for some reason the state were to be successful on appeal and the case were to be remanded to trial court, that would again open up the issue of the constitutionality of the entire smoking ban. So, quietly, we almost welcome that result so that we can get a ruling on that issue. Here, the judge didn't have to reach that issue because he found that the enforcement was unconstitutional, and courts are obligated not to go further once they find for a plaintiff on lesser constitutional grounds.
Well, and you brought up, sir, the responsibilities of permit holders. What now, since this ruling, what's the responsibility of permit holders?
That's actually very simple because it's outlined very clearly in the law. A permit holder or any business owner in Ohio must, one, post no smoking signs in their establishment. 2, not put out any kind of traditional ashtrays so as to enable the smoking. And 3, they must notify their patrons that there is a smoking ban in effect in Ohio. Once they've done those 3 things, they have complied with their obligations under the law.
So they don't have to come up to them and say, hey, you're violating the smoking ban, leave my establishment. They don't have to put someone out.
There's no requirement in the law that they force people out of their establishment. There is a requirement that they notify patrons of the smoking ban. They could do this every hour on the hour through a loudspeaker, or they could do this individually as individuals begin to smoke.
Maurice, you said that this is widespread across the state. Do you have evidence that every Department of Health is handling these investigations the same way?
What I do know is, having litigated many of these issues in the administrative hearing courts in different counties across the state, and being in contact with all of the other attorneys in the state who have done so, what I do know is that an individual has never been cited for smoking in an establishment in the state of Ohio. What I further know is that there has never been any kind of meaningful investigation where the department has ever spoken to an individual who is smoking. In fact, if you look at the testimony from the Zeno's trial, the health department people say they're afraid to speak to the individuals who are smoking because they're afraid these individuals have been drinking and could pose a threat to their employees. So they deliberately avoid that. And it's really helpful because the State Department of Health has issued and communicated certain guidelines to the local health departments, and they follow these guidelines. So that's how we were able to track the how the enforcement procedure was crafted, and then we've actually seen it play out that way as well.
So when you, in this case, according to the court documents, if an inspector walks in and sees somebody sitting at the bar with a plastic cup with water in it, smoking directly in view of the owner or the bartender, that is not sufficient for a fine?
There's a need to investigate further, to at least ask a few questions, which is something that wasn't being done before.
And the questions that should be asked would be what?
Well, that's the health department's job to craft those questions, not mine. I feel like I know what they should be, but that's for them to determine.
So just for my own understanding, so I guess, you know, never mind.
Well, actually,
Oh, I know what I was going to say.
there is let me just say there is a frustration here. This is the second major flaw in the way this law is being enforced. And to us, at the Ohio Licensed Beverage Association, that really speaks to the drafting of the initiated statute that was on the ballot. It was poorly drafted. It's very difficult, in all honesty, for the health department or anybody else to put real wheels on this thing because it's really poorly drafted. And in fact, after all, what did the voters really vote on? This thing's a mess. And the legislature now, and we will call on them to do so, the legislature now should understand that the voters were duped. We need to redraft this thing. We need to get it off the books, put a policy together that works for everybody, and go down the road and take this yoke off the people of Ohio and the businesses that are my members.
One question I have for you. Did you, when you looked at other states that had smoking bans, did you see a big difference in terms of how their laws were written and how Ohio's was?
That's a really great question, and I think that that's important to an understanding of what's going on here.